Hi everyone, how's it going? Today I'm going to do a video about my wife and I's journey through pregnancy and birth of our son, as well as I'll talk a little bit about what my son looks like, given that my wife and I don't look very much at all alike. My wife's from Brazil and I'm from the United States, and my wife is a big mix of different backgrounds. Um, and so I'll start with our decision making process for kids. We seriously considered having kids in 2022, which is about 1 year before we conceived. And there's a few different reasons why we decided to wait, but we only waited 1 year because we didn't want to push off forever. And my wife was 29 years old at the time. And we felt like let's start our family because we potentially want to have multiple children. We found out that my wife was pregnant in June of 2023, which was about 5 years after we got married. So it seemed like we had been together a while, things are going well, so let's get started with kids. Luckily, she was able to get pregnant quickly, but we currently live in the northern part of the United States. And so there's cold winters, so we preferred that he was born in the spring, but he ended up being a March baby, which is perfectly fine because we knew the first month was kind of going to be a blur, and then we'd be in April and the weather would be getting nicer and sunnier and we'd be able to go outside. So worked out well. One interesting thing about the pregnancy is that my wife is a twin, and twins run in her family. So at the beginning, after the first few months, we were thinking that there was a real possibility it was twins because she was showing some of the signs of it being twins. But after the ultrasound, it turns out it was just one very large baby. I wasn't sure if I wanted twins because, in one sense, you can potentially have two kids in one pregnancy and stop there if you wanted to have multiple kids. However, I think it would have been a little too overwhelming for us, so I think it worked out for the best that we did not have twins for the first pregnancy. Maybe the second, though. Luckily, there were no major medical complications for my wife or son throughout the pregnancy. However, in the final few months, it was pretty rough for her with fatigue and not being able to sleep well, which I know is a common thing, but it just seemed like pretty brutal for her compared to the other parts of the pregnancy, which she was able to get through pretty well. On the baby's exact due date, we actually had a false alarm where it appeared that my wife's water broke, and the doctor even seemed to think that it probably broke. So we did an official test to see if it did, and it actually did not. So we had to go home from the hospital and wait a few more days for things to develop further. And then when we went in, it actually was good in a sense where we kind of had a test run. So we went in, it was a false alarm, but we went to the hospital and got in the room and met some of the nurses and things like that. So when we went back, I think 4 days later, it just seemed like, oh, we had already done this before and we weren't very nervous about it. So I think it actually worked out for the better. The delivery was definitely tough because she did several hours of hard pushing that physically and mentally exhausted her, but then had to do a C section due to the umbilical cord being wrapped around my son's body in a way that just basically made it impossible for him to come out. So it was not an ideal situation, but obviously modern medicine allowed for a healthy mother and baby, so I'm very thankful for that. I was a little surprised when he was born because I thought I knew what a newborn baby looked like from watching TV and movies, but I found out that most newborns on TV shows are actually quite a bit older than being a newborn. They're usually at least several months old. And since babies grow so fast in the first few months, then the average newborn on TV or in movies would be the size of one of the biggest actual newborns in history. So he seemed very tiny to me when I first saw him due to my expectations being warped by Hollywood. We decided to name him Nicholas. It's popular in both Brazil and the United States, so it's familiar and easy for both of our families to pronounce. So we thought we'd go with a name that just kind of fit both countries and both cultures well. In regards to what my son looks like, my wife and I look nothing alike, so it was very interesting to see how he came out. As you can see, I have Northern European ancestry with light skin, hair, and eyes. I used to be very blonde, but it has slowly darkened as an adult, and I'm a little bit above average height for the United States. My wife is from Brazil, and her DNA test showed that she is a significant amount of African, Native American, and Southern European, as well as small amounts of some other things like South Asian. So she has dark, coarse hair, light brown skin, and brown eyes. She's definitely tall for a woman, as she's about the average height for a man in the United States. What's very interesting about human genetics is that some traits of children tend to come directly from the parents, but things like height, intelligence, and skin color are traits that can have a lot of variability. So it's best to look at the extended family to get a good sense of the realistic possibilities. This is important to understand in order to set realistic expectations for your children, especially if you're an outlier for something like intelligence compared to your other relatives. I've seen a lot of parents label their kids with a learning disability and try to medicate them when the children are perfectly normal and have the intelligence one would expect based on the average intelligence of their extended family members, but the children are significantly below the intelligence of their parents. The more of an outlier you are compared to your family or society in general, then the more likely it is that your children will be different from you in this aspect. Understanding this and accepting this will help you parent your child better and prevent you from going down paths of trying to do medical interventions or accuse teachers or coaches of discrimination if they aren't succeeding as much as you did academically or athletically. There's a good chance that your children will not have the same strengths as you in life, and that's okay. They will probably surprise you with talents that seem impossible for them to have based on who their parents are. So I would focus on the positives more than the negatives when it comes to genetic variability. That being said, because our families have so much variability in the way they look, then our son could have a huge range of things like eye color, skin color, hair texture, and height. We knew my wife might have recessive blue eyes from her dad's side and that her European ancestry combined with mine could lead to very light skin and straight hair. However, we also knew there was a chance that the baby could have physical features that neither of us display, such as looking more African than my wife does. Also, we both have a mix of different sized people in our extended families. Most of our relatives are average or somewhat above average in terms of height and weight. I'm going to hold off on showing my child on camera right now, but generally speaking, he looks more like me at first glance and then got more of my wife's body proportions. So right now he has light brown straight hair, blue eyes, and light skin that's the same skin tone as me. Many people would think he looks 100% Northern European based on his current facial features and skin tone. However, things like eye color and skin color can change in the first year of life. Also, obviously the sun can darken his skin and lighten his hair. So he could look different in the future, especially if we live in a place where the sun is strong all year round, like Brazil or the southern part of the United States. The thing that is most surprising about his physical characteristics is his length. His measurements from the hospital and first doctor's visit both put him far into the 99th percentile, and the doctors and nurses all commented on this, with one even saying that he's the longest baby that she's ever seen. There are no indications that he has any medical issues that would cause fast growth, so he may just be on the upper limits of what our family genetics can produce. Also, the length of an infant does not perfectly predict adult size, and it's statistically much more likely that he regresses towards the average and ends up at something like 6 foot 3 inches tall, as opposed to his growth accelerating and ending up over 7 feet tall. This leads into an important discussion about percentiles. A percentile is basically where your child ranks compared to other children. For example, the 10th percentile for weight means that your child is heavier than 10% of children and lighter than 90%. Your child will be tracked for physical characteristics like height, weight, and head circumference. They also look at percentiles for something like intelligence or milestones such as when your child will crawl or walk. Generally, unless your doctor is concerned about the percentile that your child's in, then I wouldn't think too much about it. Part of the reason is because development can be different at various stages of life, and a percentile rank when they're 2 years old could be very different from when they're 20 years old. Also, unless you're in one of the extreme outlier positions, then there's usually not much of a difference between, say, the 30th percentile and the 70th percentile, or even the 90th percentile versus the 10th percentile. The reason is because most things are on a bell curve where the vast majority of people are close to average and very few people being towards the low or high end of things. This means that tiny movements up or down in things like weight or height could generate a large change in the percentile without the child's growth rate changing much at all. It's much more accurate to just focus on absolute values. That way you don't get confused by the percentiles and the potential changes that could happen during your child's development. For example, if the average baby at a certain age is 17 pounds and your baby weighs 15 pounds, then that's clearly within the normal range, even if their percentile might be something like the 10th or 20th percentile based on being 2 pounds below average. Things like weight and height measurements can also be thrown off by something like the size of a baby's head. The head of a baby grows much faster than their body in the first 2 years of life. Therefore, their height or weight could be much higher than average simply because their head grew really fast, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a huge person as an adult. For some people, this might be good news and a relief, while other people might have thought that they were going to have an NFL player as a son, and in reality, they just had a baby with an enormous head, and eventually their body catches up to some degree, but the body ends up being average size. Thanks so much for watching and listening to my story. I really appreciate it. If you're interested in following my journey, then I'm going to be creating monthly videos about just being a dad and the progress that he's making and, things like that, challenges that I'm overcoming and lessons that I'm learning as being a parent. So stay tuned for that, and you can see the next video up here.